Well, I watched the Gremlins movies again. Hi, I'm Eric. Let's 3, 2, 1. Hi, I'm Eric Houston, and this is Press Play, a show about movies. You know, I just watched the Gremlins movies again. These are absolute favorite movies of mine, but it wasn't always the case. I'm not sure when exactly that changed. Certainly at some point in the last 20, maybe even longer or so years, Gremlins 2 especially really clicked for me and became an absolute favorite. But growing up, I don't remember being into the Gremlins movies that much at all. In fact, I was a little bit afraid of them. I think I liked Gremlins 2 okay, which makes sense because it's, sort of the funnier, wackier, goofier of the two. But Gremlins, the first one, really scared me. I have this memory of being in grade school, I think like second grade, and I think it was the last day of school for the year, and the teacher had said we were going to watch a movie, and she invited the kids to bring in movies to watch. Now, this was this would have been like 91, 92, somewhere in there. So, yeah, I guess most people had VCRs, but people didn't have big videotape libraries. This was still a time when a videotape was pretty expensive, but she invited us to bring them in. I'm pretty sure I brought in my copy of E.T. that I had gotten from my grandma, which is also kind of strange because I don't remember liking E.T. that much, but I'm sure it was just a tape that I had. But some other kid had brought in Gremlins, and the teacher decided we were all in second grade going to watch Gremlins. Now, I'm pretty sure I told the teacher that I wasn't allowed to watch Gremlins. I don't remember anymore if that was a rule that my mom had decided on, that I was not allowed to watch Gremlins, or if that was just I was scared of it, and so I said that I wasn't allowed to watch Gremlins. I don't remember anymore. It would be sort of weird for that to be a movie that my mom drew the line at, because I had seen RoboCop. But at the same time, I remember I wasn't supposed to watch Greystoke, that Tarzan movie with Christopher Lambert, because there's a scene where he lets a monkey out of a cage, or a gorilla out of a cage or something. But again, at this point, whether or not those were rules or just things that live in my head, I don't know. In any event, I told the teacher I wasn't allowed to watch Gremlins. The teacher did not care. There were plenty of other movies to pick from, and I can't imagine I was the only second grader that was not supposed to be watching Gremlins. I am not sure what possessed this woman that this is what we should watch. And she said that if I didn't want to watch it, that I didn't have to watch it, that I could turn my desk around. So for the next 2 hours, my desk was turned around, as I recall, while the rest of the room watched Gremlins. Very strange. And also, like, to get a room full of second graders to watch a whole movie straight through while sitting at their desks also seems like an odd choice. Definitely, it was the last day of school, and she did not want to deal with anything, and fair enough to her. But that is sort of my lasting memory of my youth and Gremlins. I had probably seen Gremlins 2 on cable a couple of times, and like I say, it's zanier. But Gremlins wasn't a movie that I had a real long-standing relationship with. I remember watching it again, not any specific time, but I'm sure I watched it again in high school or college, thereabouts. And I've seen it a time or two here over the years. As a movie itself, though, and I'll talk about it in a minute, but I've come to really like Gremlins too. Gremlins, the first one, never really clicked for me until recently. I watched it, I remember, during the pandemic, and that's when, for whatever reason, it just all of a sudden worked on all guns blazing, and I all of a sudden got it. And this is a thing that'll happen every once in a while, at least with me, with movies, where a movie that I've always been sort of lukewarm on, something happens that I can't quite explain, and all of a sudden I am way into that movie, and that happened with Gremlins. And it's not surprising. Gremlins is an absolute classic. It's got a lot going for it. The mythology of the Mogwai is right there and real solid. And real solid because they don't delve into it a lot. There's the rules, right? You can't feed them after midnight. You can't get them wet. They hate bright lights. Why are these the rules? Where did these guys come from? The movie does not care, and I think it's to its credit. It's also to the credit of Gremlins 2 that it doesn't delve into that stuff, because it doesn't matter. We have just enough rules about gremlins, just like we do with, say, vampires or werewolves, that we can have a functioning movie. And it's a movie that really does blend, I think, horror and comedy and, just sort of a family adventure film really well. It is probably too scary a movie for young kids, because the gremlins, once they've metamorphosized, are pretty scary. But Gizmo is certainly really cute. There's a lot of fun and invention to the movie. The thing I like about it is probably the chaos. That's really what Joe Dante brings to this. Joe Dante directed Gremlins and Gremlins 2. Gremlins was written by Christopher Columbus, who also he wrote, or I don't know if he wrote, but he directed, he would then direct Home Alone and Home Alone 2 and a bunch of other stuff. Well, he wrote Gremlins and presumably came up with all the rules and everything. But where the movie really kicks into high gear after being, a really solid and serviceable movie, is when the gremlins have multiplied to this point where they kind of take over the town, and especially the bar where Phoebe Cates works, and they are just terrorizing all sorts of stuff. They're acting chaotic. There's all sorts of these little skit vignettes of the gremlins doing weird and silly stuff. One of the more famous ones is the flasher gremlin. As Phoebe Cates looks down and there's a gremlin wearing a trench coat, and he opens his trench coat and mugs at her. He doesn't have anything to show. All the other gremlins are naked. How did this gremlin get a trench coat? Why does he even know what a flasher is? That's the thing about the gremlins, is the gremlins are these cartoon characters that Joe Dante has brought to life, and they operate on this cartoon logic. They're always laughing their little heads off, and they're mostly functioning on a point of view of, like, what do they think is funny? And reason or logic doesn't need to factor into it, which is, I think, a big part of what makes the gremlins themselves so special. It also helps that the movie is populated by some great faces. The movie stars Zach Galligan. He's our protagonist. I don't have a lot to say about Zach Galligan. I think he was a really capable 80s leading man for these sorts of movies, but he didn't really do a lot else. He's got Gremlins and he's got Gremlins 2, and he's got Waxworks and Waxworks 2, and those movies are pretty good. But that's kind of what it means to be Zach Galligan. Alongside him, you've got Phoebe Cates. Phoebe Cates certainly had the better career, the more memorable career. She is, first off, cute as a button. She's a terrific performer. She made, obviously, a big splash, no pun intended, with Fast Times at Ridgemont High, but she's in all sorts of other stuff, too. She's in a movie called Private School that I saw on Encore about 15 million times. And, and another personal favorite of mine, Drop Dead Fred, where her imaginary friend, as played by Rick Mayall, comes to life and creates all sorts of also chaos. Phoebe Cates, though, a terrific screen presence that, doesn't act anymore. She got married to Kevin Kline and is retired. And I gotta tell you, I would love to know what the day-to-day life is like over at the Kline-Cates household. And I'd love to see her in something again, but I also super respect if she doesn't want to do anything again. Also in the movie, Dick Miller. Always a treat to see Dick Miller, and a casting that, really tells you everything you need to know about Joe Dante and Joe Dante as a movie fan. Dick Miller was a staple of Roger Corman movies. He's in the original Little Shop of Horrors. He's in, I think, A Bucket of Blood is the one that he stars in for Corman. And he plays Mr. Fetterman, a sort of right-wingy, militant guy who, thinks that something's up with the Gremlins. And he's always a hoot to have around. But that's the other thing the whole thing, I guess, that Joe Dante brings to these movies, right, is a love of movies. With the Gremlins themselves, it's a love of Looney Tunes and Warner Brothers. But there's all kinds of touches like Dick Miller in Gremlins that tell you that this is a guy who's into like sci-fi movies and genre movies. There's a scene where Zach Galligan's dad, a character that I think is rightly dropped for the sequel, where he's at some sort of inventors conference and he's calling his family from like a payphone. And in the background, you can see Robbie the Robot walking around. You can see the time machine from the old George Pal movie. And it's a really great bit that you see these things in the background as he's talking to, I think, to Zach Galligan. And, you know, the shot cuts to Zach, and then it cuts back to the dad. And now the time machine in the background is gone because it must have traveled in time. It's a really small but really fun bit. So, yeah, Gremlins really worked for me the last couple of times I saw it. But Gremlins 2, that's the one where it's at. It's the one I liked more growing up, and I still like it more. It turns out that So Gremlins was a huge hit. Much bigger than the studio thought it would be, and they really wanted a sequel. And they approached Joe Dante to make a Gremlins 2, and he didn't really want to do it. He'd already done that. But he said he would do Gremlins 2 if they let him do whatever he wanted. And for whatever reason, the studio agreed to that. And the result is a movie that is absolutely out of its mind. There's that fun Key and Peele sketch where Jordan Peele plays like a movie consultant who goes into a boardroom and encourages all the boardroom people to pitch the weirdest, wildest gremlins they can think of. A vegetable gremlin, a sexy lady gremlin, a spider gremlin, a gremlin made of electricity, all of that. And those are all things that are in the movie. I got to meet Joe Dante at a horror movie convention this past fall, and I asked him if that was kind of how it was, you know, how they coming up with these gremlins. And he said, yeah, pretty much. Joe Dante is not a man of a lot of words. Very, very pleasant guy. And to meet this really soft-spoken guy and know that he's the chaotic mind behind everything that transpires in Gremlins and Gremlins 2, it's pretty wild. But Gremlins 2, the plot of it is that now Zach Galligan and Phoebe Cates have moved to the big city. They work at this giant skyscraper where there's all sorts of weird businesses. Things happen, and so there's another Gremlins infestation, this time in the giant skyscraper. The Gremlins get into the genetics lab in the skyscraper, and now they mutate into all sorts of weird creatures, Bat Gremlin, Spider Gremlin, Sexy Lady Gremlin, and then go about their usual business doing weird things for their own amusement. But this time that's amped up way more. We kind of don't get the gremlin chaos in the first Gremlins movie until about the third act. But Gremlins 2 is as much of that stuff as possible. Dante and company are not really interested in traditional movie mechanics. They want to get to the zany stuff as fast as possible. And you know that's the case from the very beginning of the movie. Because the movie, before we even get to the Gremlins, starts with a new animated segment with Daffy Duck and Bugs Bunny, directed by the great Chuck Jones. And that moment where Daffy and Bugs fight over the Warner Brothers shield is really sort of the Rosetta Stone for Gremlins 2. It's Dante saying, I am going to make a live-action Looney Tunes movie, and heck if he doesn't. Gremlins 2 is really something to behold. You've got all of those weirdo gremlins. They're doing all of their little bits. They're interacting with a bunch of cable TV shows because, of course, there's a cable TV station, so they interrupt a cooking show. And there's like a horror movie host show. And they get up to all kinds of weird shenanigans. And I absolutely love it. I love all of the weirdo gremlins. They're all so great. My favorite is absolutely Greta, the sexy lady gremlin. I always found her sort of fascinating, and I still do. Although, you know, now that I'm grown up, there's a plot, there's a side plot in this movie where the building security guy is Robert Picardo from Star Trek Voyager, and Greta the Gremlin takes a liking to Robert Picardo and covers him in kisses and stuff. And the very last shot of the movie is Robert Picardo looking at the camera like, maybe it's not so bad. Absolutely insane. The whole movie's insane. Outside of Robert Picardo, there's other great genre people in this. Dick Miller is back. Christopher Lee, who starred in all the great Hammer horror Dracula movies, and he plays the evil wizard in the Lord of the Rings movies and all kinds of other stuff. He's in it as the evil geneticist. who I think is maybe a Nazi. You've also got, working with him, you have the twins from Terminator 2, the two twins who played the cop, so they could do the shot where the T-1000 looks just like the cop and they're in the same shot together. Those guys are in it. John Glover, the great John Glover, he played Lex Luthor's dad on Smallville. Well, here he is as, I can't think of his first name right now, but Mr. Clamp, the wacky millionaire who owns the skyscraper, chewing up scenery, having the gall darn time of his life. Gremlins 2 also gets to do one of those things I like in movies a lot, where about halfway through the gremlins accidentally destroy the movie you're watching, and you see their shadows on the screen because they messed up the film. Now, in the theatrical version and the version that I have on Laserdisc, which, P.S., did I get Joe Dante to sign my Laserdisc? You bet I did. In the theatrical version, then we cut to a movie theater, which is supposed to be the movie theater that you're in, and a mom goes out to the lobby and complains to the manager that the gremlins have messed up the film. And so the manager goes in and he gets Hulk Hogan to go take care of the gremlins. Now, I could do with less Hulk Hogan in my life generally, and certainly in my Gremlins movie. I have heard that in the video version, the VHS tape version, it's a different scene. That the gremlins mess up the videotape and Mr. T is the one who stops things. I haven't been able to find this on YouTube. I don't have a Gremlins 2 VHS copy handy, which is kind of surprising, I suppose. So I don't know if that's true or not. I would like to find out. I would definitely buy Gremlins 2 at a garage sale to find out, because I would gladly trade Mr. T for Hulk Hogan. But yeah, Gremlins 2, absolute marvel of filmmaking. The movie that I would compare it the most to is probably not Gremlins, but is Animal Crackers, the last of the Marx Brothers movies for Paramount, where they just throw plot out the window and it's just anarchic. And Gremlins 2 is very much that. Definitely one of the big movies for me. Now, if you've been paying attention to movie news lately, you've seen that, yeah, they're ramping up to do a Gremlins 3. Why not? They're reviving every 80s property that they can, so of course they want to do it with Gremlins. There was a cartoon or something on Netflix. I haven't seen any of it. But yeah, they want to bring it back to the movies. And that should be pretty exciting, but here's the wrinkle. It doesn't seem like Joe Dante is going to be involved at all. Not terribly surprising. Joe, who made a lot of great movies outside of the Gremlins movies, he did Inner Space, I think he did Explorers, I think that's right. He did Matinee. He's a terrific filmmaker, but his career, like a lot of guys, did sort of peter out. And the last movie two he made aren't very good. He sort of came back to the Gremlin space with Small Soldiers, which feels like a Gremlins knockoff, which is a little bit disappointing. And he did an actual live-action Looney Tunes movie with Looney Tunes back in action, which is better than you would think it is, but still isn't great. But, maybe it's time to revisit that one, too. So you can see where a Hollywood studio wouldn't necessarily want to hitch their wagon to the Dante train, although I think if you're doing a Gremlins movie, why would you go with anyone else? The anyone else they're going with is Chris Columbus, which on paper makes sense. He wrote Gremlins, and he's got a huge track record. Home Alone 2 as a director, and he did the first 2 Harry Potter movies as a director, and he just did the Thursday Murder Club adaptation for Netflix, which was fine. Chris Columbus makes a lot of sense on paper, but do I think he's going to make a good Gremlins 3? I don't. Yeah, he wrote the first one, but those movies are Joe Dante's. It's his sensibility that informs the chaos of those movies and what makes them great. I think we're going to get a perfectly serviceable Gremlins movie out of Chris Columbus. Hopefully he gets a little bit more money to make it look pretty good. The problem with Thursday Murder Club is it looks very TV movie-y. So I'd like to think he can do better than that. But I think our best case scenario for a Gremlins 3 is a Gremlins movie that's very much like the first 2 acts of Gremlins. Pretty plotty, pretty by the numbers, and I do hope, I hadn't even really thought about this, But I got to imagine they're going to want to try to do the Gremlins as CG, as computer generated. And that seems like a shame because a big part of the charm of Gremlins and Gremlins 2 is all the practical creatures. I hope they at least do a couple of practical ones, but hey, we'll see. Maybe I'll be wrong. For the time being, though, Gremlins, I'm going to recommend it. Gremlins 2, hard recommend. So I'll see you next time. Until then, stay safe, watch movies.